In our search for answers to the 12 questions of life, we've discussed man's hope in finding a purpose, or in the case of an 8th grade class, a career. And we've considered the pursuit of dreams. But of course, both of those questions are generally reserved for the younger set. Few, if any, have ever asked a 75-year-old, what do you dream of accomplishing in the last waning years of your life? And no one would ever dare ask a 75-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? This week, as we continue our look at Ecclesiastes and the tough questions, we ask a tough question which lies at the opposite end of the spectrum. This question is generally asked by those who have experienced much of this life. It's a question which definitely registers with the more mature. It's a question one is only tempted to ask when it seems that the best years are already past. And that's why I wore my funeral attire this morning. You know, the black suit and the black shoes, the whole deal. Because I want to pay tribute to the years that have already passed. In Disney's classic film, Mary Poppins, this question is at the very heart of Mr. Banks' troubles. You may remember his song the first time he meets Bert the chimney sweep. A man has dreams of walking with giants, to carve his niche in the edifice of time. Before the mortar of his zeal has a chance to congeal, the cup is dashed from his lips. The flame is snuffed of morning. He's brought to rack and ruin in his prime. And then he goes on to sing, my world was calm, well-ordered, exemplary. Then came this person with chaos in her wake. And now my life's ambitions go with one fell blow. It's quite a bitter pill to take. You know, most of us have had to face that reality at one time or another. We find ourselves conceding that much of what we once hoped for is now beyond our reach. Unfortunately, that concession may be necessitated for a variety of reasons. Maybe like Mr. Banks, we feel there's been one person who has blocked our progress, an unfair boss, an interfering friend, or a domineering parent. Maybe we just feel the encroachment of the years. We all reach that point in time when we're aware that we're no longer 20, no longer 30, maybe no longer 50, no longer in the prime of our lives. Or maybe we regret having missed those one-time opportunities when they presented themselves. We decided against a particular career. We passed up an educational opportunity. We took hold of the status quo rather than taking the gamble on something better. Unfortunately, under the sun, upon this earth, considering only the temporal world, all we can expect to find are the tough questions. We don't seem to be finding the tough answers. And sadly, it's just as likely to be true in the life of the successful as it is in the life of the failure. Nearly every man faces certain what-ifs in his life. And that's because time marches on. The world continues, but since as Shakespeare wrote all the world's a stage, every man makes his entrance and his exit. And the world continues as a stage for the next act, the next generation, the next group. This morning we come to Solomon's most recognized passage from that which is probably his last written work. This passage has found its way into art and poetry. In 1965, the Byrds turned it into a song. It's a passage which deals with, if not the toughest of the tough questions, certainly the question which is the most disturbing to us. This morning we return to Solomon's reflection in Ecclesiastes, and we try to answer the tough question. Where has all the time gone? Ecclesiastes 3, beginning in the first verse. There is an appointed time for everything. There is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent for and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And so Solomon begins to answer the question as we examine the reality, time has gone in a myriad of activity. If we think about it, we really don't have to think about it too long or too hard. The reason time passes so quickly is because we get caught up in so many different things. In our lives, it seems there's always something to do, something which calls for our attention, something which demands our exertion. And Solomon lists 7 parallelisms which represent the whole of man's existence. And we might break Solomon's complete list down into 3 groups. There are activities which are inevitable. Much of what happens in our lives simply happens. It must happen. It occurs without our consent, without our design, without our planning. And in being inevitable, we don't typically possess any control over those kind of things. Giving birth and dying. As we think about childbirth, we may fool ourselves into believing that it is discretionary rather than inevitable. After all, we've all heard couples say, we are trying to get pregnant. But from our own lives and from the scriptures, we realize that even childbirth comes when it comes and not necessarily when we choose. Of course, dying is obviously inevitable. Like childbirth, the date is not of our choosing. Life would change drastically if, like many of the sci-fi shows, we could accurately predict the date and time of our departure. I still have 10 years, 6 months, 7 days, 4 hours, and 32 minutes. What am I going to accomplish? But we're not given that luxury. Death comes when it comes. Planning and uprooting are also inevitable. We must wait for those appropriate seasons, and those seasons are dictated by other forces than ourselves. When I first came to North Carolina, I was amazed. We'd had 2 weeks of 70-degree weather, and so I went to Lowe's to get my annuals for the flower boxes I used to have, and I was surprised because they told me annuals won't be in for another 3 weeks because there's still a chance of a frost. It'd been 70 degrees for 2 weeks. What do you mean I have to wait another 3? But in the same way, there's a given season for uprooting that which has been planted. There are few sights more pathetic than an empty field beyond its time. Bare stalks rise from the soil, the wind blows the dust and chaff and swirls, the spring green has turned brown. And we uproot either entirely or by tilling the waste simply back into the soil. All of those couplets represent a kind of bookend to life. They represent the animal kingdom or the plant life. And the cycle remains a cycle. And the cycle must be heeded in its time. Because they all follow the inevitable timetable rather than a discretionary one. Of course, there are activities which are not inevitable. Solomon lists activities which are discretionary. Solomon also reminds us that much of what happens in our lives is out of our hands, but there are activities brought about by our own pursuits, desires, and thought. Some of the discretionary facets of our lives are killing and healing. There are times in all of our lives when killing may become a choice in self-defense or in the protection of others. And there are times when we make the choice to heal rather than inflicting more harm. We choose to bomb rather than bite the bullet. Tearing down and building up. Like its couplet, we find times when we must tear down, especially in the correction of that which is not serviceable in our lives. And while we think immediately of buildings, we should also consider the tough love necessary in some relationships. We simply have to break the relationship in order to mend the relationship. We have to cut off what's been in order to move forward to what will be. And so likewise, lives, we build up, we support, we reinforce those things which need minor adjustments to restore their usefulness to our lives. Solomon then lists weeping and laughing because sad tidings come into all our lives, as do the somber realities we must face. But on the other hand, as Solomon showed us in the last section, camaraderie and good friends may give us real reason to laugh and rejoice. And mourning and dancing are an even deeper part of this. And so the second half of this couplet makes it even more fitting. Mourning is a deeper, more lasting sorrow than weeping, and dancing is that reflexive physical display of our inner laughter. Now, dancing is not to be confused with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers' rehearsed dance, nor does it represent the gyrations on a dance floor filled with people simply out for an evening's activities. At its core, this dancing represents the real joy which fights to get out, which demands an audience, which wants to be seen. This is the kind of dancing David did before the ark as it re-entered Jerusalem. Gathering stones and throwing stones. For the understanding of this euphemism, we must consider the second half of the couplet. Gathering stones and throwing stones is Solomon's politically correct designation for the act of physical love. There are times in the fidelity of marriage when such love is not only appropriate, but beneficial in the very building of that relationship. There are also times when such love is inappropriate. And from Solomon's limitations, that's true even without the moral guidelines of God's revelation. There are simply some times that you should not practice physical love. In the event of injury or illness, it has nothing to do with morals. That's good common sense. Embracing and shunning embracing is the second half of that couplet. In the same reality as the gathering of stones, there are times when embracing may be a true godsend. But in like manner, there are times when it's best to avoid such contact. Few adulterous affairs begin in the culmination of desire. They begin with a simple touch, simple contact, which ultimately, if left unchecked, leads to the infidelity. Unlike the inevitable, these things are often the results of our own determinations, the willfulness of our lives, the choices we make, and they produce the results within our lives. And there are those activities which are a blend of the two. There are activities which are necessitated. And while this last group seems to be entirely within our discretion, much of that discretion is taken out of our hands by the necessity of such actions, such as a time to search, a time to give up for lost. Most of us have probably misplaced something on occasion. Like the shepherd, the woman, and the prodigal's father from our Lord's parable, such loss necessitates our searching. We simply seek high and low to find that which is misplaced. We feel the need. We are driven to look. You know, the ironic thing is that I discovered long ago that if I cannot find something I've misplaced, the surest way for me to find it is to simply replace the lost item. When I go to put the new item away, the old one will be right there. Keeping and throwing away. The second half of the couplet represents the other side of the coin. There are times when we should relish the things we have, but of necessity, there are times when we need to clear our lives by relinquishing the things which are no longer useful. I don't know how many of you watch it on MeTV. There's a show on Sunday night called Collector's Call. And they just go to these people's homes where they have great collections of a variety of things. And my brother and I were talking about that show one time, and my brother made the comment, some of those people have gone beyond collecting, and they are nothing more than hoarders. And that's what happens to our lives. You know, there are things that we can collect in our lives. There are things that can mean something in our lives. There are things that might touch us in a very special and emotional way. But then there are things which we no longer need, we no longer have any use for, and we should just simply clear out the burden of our lives. Solomon's second couplet should be also familiar to us. Tearing apart and sewing together. And upon reading the first half of this couplet, we might naturally think of clothing. Even the best of clothing eventually goes beyond our repair. We've all had threadbare shirts. We've all had socks with holes in them. We've all had shoes in which the soles fell off. We know what it means to have clothing that just needs to be scrapped. And at that point, the only thing to do with that clothing is either tear it into rags or cut them into scraps for a patchwork quilt. And of course, other clothes may be simply snagged and torn, and they instead receive mending and patches and maybe a little basting here and there, and everything's done. But talking and remaining silent is the second half of this couplet. And so we need to immediately understand the deeper intent of Solomon. It's not merely clothing to which Solomon refers. It is how we approach the world around us. You know, I knew a man who loudly proclaimed that his son should never have married the girl he did. In fact, he should have married one of the girls he dated from high school, and she was still calling the old homestead to talk to him on occasion. Needless to say, this man was actively tearing apart his son's relationship because he felt it had no usefulness, it had no purpose, it had no place in his life. But on the other hand, silence may give us the opportunity to help build up, to restore, to mend, to reunite. Solomon's third couplet speaks to the matter of our hearts, loving and hating. The love which has the most in common with the love Solomon addresses here is simply concern for our fellow man. It's a love which is more comprehensive in its value and stretches our benevolent nature toward our fellow man. And in the same way, the hate to which Solomon refers is that which places men at odds with each other for truly foundational reasons. More than his dog came over and used your yard as a bathroom. These are foundational issues, which may be moral, ethical, or spiritual in nature. Solomon also writes in his Proverbs, there are 6 things which the Lord hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who speaks strife among brothers. In the same way that those activities are despised by God, they should equally be abhorrent to all just men. We should find those acts and the people who commit those acts hateful. In the second half of the couplet, Solomon speaks of war and peace. And while it may seem foreign to a loving, forgiving Christianity, the realities of this world necessitate certain unpleasantries. And from the opening line of this couplet, we must understand there is indeed a time for war. There are things worth fighting for and worth fighting against. But we must also seek out that time of peace when all men agree and actively live harmoniously. Now, while we may divide the activities of life into categories, should we really consider the full ramifications of all, each of these 3 groups might easily be considered inevitable. There's a certain inevitability to all of life, because life is so cyclical. And we all continue, as the previous generations have continued, to do exactly the same thing over and over again. But no matter how they're divided, the activities of our lives certainly have the power to keep us so busy that time seems to fly, leaving us to wonder, where has all the time gone? And that is the problem. Every activity in this life consumes. Each consumes our time, our energy, and a very real part of our limited existence upon this planet. And so the second lesson we learn about the fleeting nature of man is time has gone because man makes poor use of it. You know, time is fleeting and we ask where it's going and we don't even realize that most of the problem is that we waste it. We do not make the best use of the time that is given to us. Verse 10. I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He has made everything appropriate in his time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that no man will find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is a gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it. There is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. Solomon contends that man makes poor use of his time in three ways. First, man simply doesn't learn through his activities. Solomon returns to his theme of the previous task, and it is a grievous. Let's start that again. Solomon returns to his theme of the grievous task. And it is a grievous task because man simply refuses to learn. So he is doomed to repeat the cycles of life over and over. It's simply what we do. We've spoken before about the philosopher George Santayana's quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it." And we've remarked that the only thing man learns from history is that we don't learn anything from history. But another one of Santayana's aphorisms is sanity is a madness put to good uses, and waking life is a dream controlled. You know, the sad truth is that all men are on the same treadmill, and they're only a single step from madness. Our frustration is that the activities of this life simply will not teach us what we need to know. We're kept too busy to properly consider, we're too active to calmly reflect, and our lives are too tedious to adequately teach. And we are left with tough question after tough question after tough question. And this world and its short generations will never answer. And so every man feels himself on the edge, and he can only hope for that breakthrough which will finally ring true as the benchmark for not only his life, but for all mankind. So man makes poor use of his time because man cannot comprehend through activity. You know, many men learn a career or a job or just a hobby through a hands-on experience. That's true of an auto tech, or that's true of an agriculture, or true in carpentry. It's even true if you're writing with the greats. You can learn in a hands-on way. But man will never answer the tough questions through the activities of his life or the work of his hands. There's simply no way to come to any eternal spiritual conclusion through our working with material things. And sadly, Solomon has discovered that even the use of great intellect, reason, and wisdom is not enough to lay hold of the tough answers, purpose of life, design and creation, intent of will. And he again reminds man of the necessary concession. Verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. That is the gift of God. You know, the search for the answers to the tough questions will not bring us anywhere near the satisfaction to be found in simply living a kindly life and enjoying the bounty of a good life. But still man finds himself convicted of the need to search. We want to extend, we want to discover, we want to reach beyond ourselves. And then too, man makes poor use of time, in that man cannot build the everlasting. Look again at verse 14. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. Man's greatest aspiration is to build something which will outlast himself. It's why he has children. It's why he builds empires. It's why he amasses fortunes. It's why he authors books, songs, and plays. It's why he proves to be philanthropic. Now, obviously, there are some other minor reasons for those things as well as man's perpetuity. He may have children to pass on his love. He may build an empire in the hope of building a better future. He may amass a fortune to live a better life. He may author books, plays, and songs because there are words in his heart which must be allowed free rein. And he may be philanthropic because he wants his fellow man to benefit from this life's culture. But it is always the yearning for some kind of continuance to himself, continuance to his life, continuance to his name, a way in which to keep alive, which drives a man to extremes. Unfortunately, Solomon reminds us again, man simply cannot hope for more than his few years. Even his best efforts are fleeting before God's works. And Solomon's conclusion is similar to that which we have seen before. Enjoy your food, your drink, and your work, for that's the best for which man might hope under the sun. And so finally, Solomon bemoans the fleeting nature of time because time has gone, for man has corrupted it. You know, one of the saddest parts about forgetting the past is in the way that each generation seeks out the same failures of that past. Unfortunately, those failures are not limited to a resurgence of communism or socialism or any other ism upon this earth. Man just simply never learns from his mistakes. Genesis 11. Now the whole earth used the same language. As they journeyed east, they found a plain in the land and settled there. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. That is, of course, the beginning of the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, I'm not going to tell you one of the theories I heard while I was in college, that the tower was actually a launching pad for a rocket ship. Okay, but I want you to see the similarities from generation to generation. Man finds that projects inspire people, and usually the bigger the project, the better the project. People love to feel like they are involved in something big. Man wants nothing more than to elevate himself to a place where he will never again be questioned or find himself subservient. That's the whole point. We're going to build this city and this tower so that nobody can drive us away. Nobody can do anything to us. Because we'll be it. We are the cat's meow. And man wants to make a name for himself. Sadly, Solomon realized that nothing has changed in nearly 3,000 years. In the 21st century, we should realize that nothing has changed in the 3,000 years since Solomon. Man is still intent on providing a lasting memory of his life on this earth. And of course, we know the rest of the story. God stopped the wickedness of their conceited plan by confusing their language in order that man could no longer work as one. But we miss the point if we believe that the idea of the construction or great deeds was the wicked thing. There's nothing wrong with lofty pursuits as long as those pursuits are truly altruistic. The wickedness in the plain of Shinar was the selfish desire to become like God, to become better than everyone else, to make a name for themselves. Solomon has witnessed that same selfishness in the life of man. Verse 16. I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. Man corrupts time when time simply becomes a justification. Solomon has seen enough of the world to realize that while God's will shall one day prevail, in the here and now under the sun, life must be endured as it comes. Life must be faced for what it is. And sadly, that leads to a disturbing reality. God's ultimate order has been prostituted through man's corruption. Much of the evil done in the world is justified in the name of expediency. Authority is abused, principles are put aside, morals are dismissed. And unfortunately, it's all done in the name of time. Time is short, so what must be done quickly. Abuses can be overlooked in the name of expediency. Basic guidelines are seen as too tedious to endure. Values are exchanged in a flurry of activity. And while are aware of such abuses in the public eye, we must not forget their private departures as well. Man still frequently steals from his employer or robs his employee. The fidelity of the marriage bed is forsaken for the moment of the heart. When push comes to shove, power and position always mean more than philosophy. Man uses the brevity of time to commend less than even good behavior. And man's corrupt time when time becomes destiny. You know, the sad truth is, it is simply too easy living under the sun to forget any eternal destiny. The needs of the day, the cares of this life, and the absence of answers to the tough questions lead man to overlook anything beyond his 70 to 80 years. Verse 18. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. When life under the sun becomes the whole of our existence, our destiny becomes synonymous with the material. But Solomon has seen worse yet. He realizes that a destiny which ends in the grave is no destiny at all. It is a destiny which has more in common with the beast of the field than it does for those created in the image of God. For such a destiny simply cannot move us to any destination other than the one to which the hearse takes us. And there no one asks, where is all the time gone? Events, deeds, activities, whether inevitable, discretionary, or simply the exigencies of life, all make time fly. They amuse, they entertain, they divert, they distract us from the reality that soon we all return to the dust from which we came. But if this life is all we can possibly know, then our destiny is a destiny of scarcity, forgetfulness, and death. And even with his self-imposed limitations, Solomon's words should speak loudly to all men. If the frustration found in this world is what it is, our only joy is to eat and drink and enjoy our work. Solomon wants us to see the despair we've inherited and therefore appreciate its passing nature. And for the Christian, we might argue, but that's not all there is. But we need to remember this. Solomon is writing primarily to Israel, God's chosen people. And God's chosen people have come to the place in their lives where their lives are strictly tied to this earth, to this existence, to this reality. And they're miserable. They're not finding the meaning or the answers they hope to see. And if Solomon could write to God's chosen people, he could very easily be writing to us. We would do well to also heed his words before it's too late. And we also find ourselves